All right, grade sevens, the Spanish flu part two. Here we go. We're getting right into it. Again, I'm just going to read the slides, and you guys can do your further research if you'd like, and I will add some anecdotes here and there, and we will learn more about this absolutely dreadful disease that hit the world, much like COVID-19 did, but almost or a lot harder, right? We know that about 50 million people died from the Spanish flu, so it rocked the world in a much bigger way. However, we know that we dealt with it in a very similar way, and that's what I really want you to take from this, is that it's fascinating how we dealt with the Spanish flu about 100 years ago. We learned a lot from doing that. We learned a lot from that incident. And it's interesting looking back at history because you learn a lot of things and then we act on that learning. And that's exactly what we're doing today. When the 1918 flu hit, doctors and scientists were unsure what caused it or how to treat it. There were no effective vaccines or antivirals, drugs that treat the flu. Sounds similar. Complicating matters was worse was the fact that World War I had left parts of America with a shortage of physicians and other health workers, and of the available medical personnel in the U.S., many came down with the flu themselves. Additionally, hospitals in some areas were so overloaded with flu patients that schools, private homes, and other buildings had to be converted into makeshift hospitals, some of which were staffed by medical students. Okay, so we learned from this. It says there at the bottom, it says, sound familiar? We have learned that hospitals and healthcare will become overcrowded if we don't act quickly with social distancing and flattening the curve. So during the Spanish flu, perhaps people didn't quite understand how much they would overload the hospitals. But now with our numbers and with our statistics, we know that our healthcare system was going to be overcrowded. And so we knew that we had to act. And that's why we were doing what we're doing today. We're not practicing social distancing today to necessarily get rid of the illness. It's not going to get rid of it, right? And you probably know that. You've probably heard that. This doesn't mean that the illness just, only affects a few people and just kind of goes away. That's not what it does. It only goes away when we develop a vaccine, or when we can make it go away, or if we can develop some antiviral drug that will beat up against it when we take it. Aspirin poisoning. This is fascinating. These are kinds of things that happened during the Spanish flu that wouldn't happen during COVID-19 because we are so much further advanced along in our healthcare. I'm speaking for our culture. I mean, possibly something. I don't even think this would happen in a less developed country. But anyways, this is very fascinating. I'll just read this slide for you. With no cure for the flu, many doctors prescribed medication that they felt would alleviate the symptoms or get rid of the symptoms, including aspirin, which you've probably heard of before. It's probably in your medical cabinet, which had been trademarked by Bayer in 1899, a patent that expired in 1917, meaning new companies were able to produce the drug during the Spanish flu epidemic in 1918. Medical professionals advised patients to take up to 30 grams per day, a dose now known to be toxic. Symptoms of aspirin poisoning included hyperventilation and pulmonary edema, or the buildup of fluid in the lungs, and it's now believed that many of the October deaths were actually caused by hastened by aspirin poisoning. So it's interesting that they were taking this drug that they thought were alleviating symptoms of this terrible illness, but in fact, they actually were making things a lot worse. And so that's, again, we learned from this. As you're aware, medical advancement has taught us many things, including the important fact that too much of one drug could be extremely harmful. So we have lots of pharmacists working now in ensuring that we would not take too much of one drug. I'm not sure how much you know, but the if you go get a little bottle of Tylenol, or if you look in the medical cabinet with your parental supervision and take a look at some of those medicines, they're fascinating if you read on the bottle themselves, because the description will tell you exactly how much to take. And that's not just a recommended dosage. That's like people work for years to figure out exactly how much of one drug that somebody should be taking or can take. Okay, so when I go and take an extra strength Tylenol when I'm feeling sick, when I have a cold or a flu or something, when I have a really bad headache, I can't take 3 of them for a reason, right? It's not going to be good for my body. It's not long before it's worse taking too much of one drug. Okay. So that's really interesting. The toll on society, not dissimilar to the situation we are in now. The Spanish flu took a heavy toll on society. People stopped working and life slowed down, not to mention the amount of life that was lost. It was been loosely calculated that 50 million people died worldwide. Those numbers are way, way higher, I hope, than what COVID-19 will take. It will not take 50 million. It's just not possible. That number is not incredibly accurate. In fact, it could be a lot more than that. Because again, we've learned from this. We know we've learned from this in a couple of different ways. We know exactly how many people are going to die from COVID-19 because we know those statistics. We have those numbers. Back in these days, people weren't as well connected, and so the numbers of death, people really didn't know exactly. We didn't add it all up. Interestingly, we also know what sort of toll this flu will have on our society. Our government is working hard to counteract this with subsidy packages that are paying families who can no longer work. And in Canada, this seems to be somewhat effective. Although society will not be the same, people will struggle less, which will have a really positive effect on our mental health, right? Because people in society will be affected less if people are happier. And so our government's doing a pretty good job in Canada. Down south in the United States, it's a bit of a different situation. We have, wow, all these notes when I say we have learned from this really do, I'm particularly talking about our country, about Canada, because we do have a rather sad situation happening down in the United States right now. Their president just told the public that they could possibly inject themselves with some I don't know, some disinfectant or something. It's absolutely insane. And so now I'm kind of stepping backwards in thinking about that aspirin poisoning slide. Sometimes we think that we haven't learned from any of this, but we certainly have. We know that in Canada, our government, our leader, our top doctor, Dr. Tam, would not be recommending anything like that, obviously. The toll on the economy. Of course, the Spanish flu had a huge toll on the economy, just like COVID-19 is, because of course, when we talked about this in class briefly, but when a pandemic happens like this, the economy stops. Why? People aren't going out. I'm not going out. I'm not shopping. I'm so fortunate that I'm still getting paid because I have a job, but my bank account just keeps on increasing, and I'm thinking, weird, I usually spend this money. The flu was also detrimental to the economy. In the United States, businesses were forced to shut down because so many employees were sick. Basic services such as mail delivery and garbage collection were hindered due to flu-stricken workers. In some places, there weren't enough farm workers to harvest crops. Think about that. Even state and local health departments closed for business, hampering efforts to chronicle the spread of the 1918 flu and provide the public with answers about it. So we have learned from this. So far, we have considered all food services essential, and we will do everything we can to keep those farmers farming and grocery stores open and safe. It's fascinating that we now, overnight almost, we can consider a grocery store clerk an essential employee. And they really are. They really are essential. And I don't think we fully understand that when we're not in a pandemic. And I really hope we can take that kind of thing away from this. When we get out of this pandemic, we think grocery store workers are really important people. Farmers are really important people. Those people are putting food on our tables. And that's the only way that we're eating in this society, in this culture, unless we're growing our own food and bringing it right to the table, which some of us are doing a little bit of that, but none of us are doing only that. How did it all end? By the summer of 1919, the flu pandemic came to an end. These pandemics do come to an end. COVID-19 is going to come to an end. Those that were infected either died or developed immunity. If a bunch of people develop immunity and a bunch of people die, a flu pandemic will come to an end. And you can imagine the celebrations people would have when this would happen. How did the world step into the roaring 20s after this disaster combined with all the death from World War I? After this disaster of this magnitude, usually there's a bit of a kickback to the economy. And it happens so quickly. The strange effects of such disasters as COVID-19 are that for those who survive, we will see the economy strike back in a massive proportion. People will be willing to spend a lot more money after getting out of such an unpredictable and a difficult time. I've heard a lot of podcasts about this and about how we have to actually be careful. We've got to be very careful when we do get out of this. When we do get out of COVID-19, we have to be very careful that we don't that we don't dig in too much, that we don't indulge too much. Because you can imagine when this is all over and we're allowed to go on planes and we're allowed to go driving places and we're allowed to go to bars and restaurants, what is the world going to be like? Are we just going to immediately indulge in that pleasure? Are we going to hop on a plane and go to Mexico immediately? If everyone does that, the world is going to get sick again. The world's going to be a really, really tough place if that happens. So we have to be very careful. When we do come out of this, we've got to do it slowly. And I've heard so much interesting stuff about this, about the kickback, right? Coming back to life. We can do it in basically one of two ways. We could come back really slowly and nicely and carefully. And if we do come back carefully, then the world could be a much safer and healthier place than it was before, right? Because we could think about all the amazing effects on the environment this is all having. Maybe we won't be driving as much anymore or flying as much anymore. In any case, your assignment for today, for this micro unit on the Spanish flu is, this is a really neat story. There's a 106-year-old woman named Connie Titchen. She's over to the right there. You can see her. She survived both the Spanish flu and COVID-19. Obviously, she's 106 years old. So she fought through both of them and came out on the other side. I want you to imagine that you are Connie, and it's 1926. So I put that date in there because if it was 1918, she'd be very, very young. If it's 1926, you're 16 years old. You sit down to write a letter to yourself in the future. Okay? So about 8 years ago, the Spanish flu happened. Okay? In 1918. And in 1926, you sit down, you are Connie, hanging out, and you're about to write a letter. You're not doing that on a computer because computers don't exist. Think about everything she's been through. Like, look at that person and think about how much she's been through in the world. When she was your age, there was absolutely nothing. It was nothing like what you have today. There were no computers, no internet. So she has a pen or a pencil. She's just about to write a letter to herself in the future. In this letter, I want you to mention all of the strategies people will be able to use to help get through a future pandemic. So essentially, it can say, "Dear future self," and then I want you to write a letter and explain what we know from the Spanish flu, from getting through the Spanish flu. What do we know to get through another one? You're going to mention social distancing. You're going to mention the toll on the society. You're going to mention the toll on the economy that it'll have. You're going to mention slowly coming out because they didn't slowly come out. The Roaring Twenties were a blast. It was an unbelievable time, right? The Roaring 1920s, we could get into that, actually. Maybe we will. The Roaring Twenties is a phenomenal era to explore. And then 1929, about 10 years later, stock market completely crashed. And then another war happened shortly thereafter. So, that's your assignment. Write a letter to your future self. If you have any questions, let me know. This has been just a little micro unit on the Spanish flu. It's been a lot of fun. Perfect. That's it. Have a great day.